making a video about Letterkenny the other day. Letterkenny is a television show from Canada that takes place in the country of rural Canada, with Hicks of rural Canada. It's a show that speaks to me on several levels. I grew up in a house with woods, 10-minute drive from town, surrounded by apple and cherry farms. Now I live in Iowa, part of the breadbasket of America, known for growing corn and being confused with Idaho, and also being a mess of politics all the time. If you drive too far in each direction in town, you know you've passed your thing if you see cornfield. I relate to the show so much growing up in rural Michigan, where if your hobby isn't hunting, snowmobiling, or fishing, then you're bored. And even then, you're probably bored a lot. Boredom plays a big part in the show. Sitting around, shooting the breeze with your friends. But it also plays into new me, very plugged in, very on the internet me. Its jokes are sometimes barrages of wordplay. The show uses memes very well in its jokes, that sometimes they'll make one joke and then continue making that joke for several minutes and variations of it. But the thing that attracts me and gets most of my attention is the thing that you want to see in your heroes in television, and you want to see in your stories in television. A man needs help, you help him.
When a friend asks for help, you help him. Just tell him you're busy.
When a friend asks for help, you help him.
You guys heard what the hockey coach is up to at the golf course? That fucking says there's too much shits from Canada Gooses on the golf course.
There's too much shit from Canada Gooses everywhere. Just keep your dog out of it.
But get this. To curb the amounts of shits from Canada Gooses, that degenerate son bitch has put the wheels in motion to oil and grease up the eggs. God, Jimmy.
The fuck you talking about, oil and grease up the eggs?
They start down the Canada Goose's nests. Put oil in Canada Goose's eggs so they won't hatch.
Oh, what?
Think you can take out Canadian gooses? Must be nice.
You ever notice how there's always Canada Gooses flying overhead when there's a fire? They're flapping water on it. But no one calls them heroes. They're not in it for the glory. They're in it for the people, for the relationships.
Gooses are comrades. So in Letterkenny, when our titular characters hear that there is someone that needs help, they hem and they haw, and they don't want to do it, and they see how they can do it, and then one phrase always clenches whether or not they'll help someone. A man needs help, you help him. Or geese. As an indoor goose, they belong to my partner. By the way, I'm really disappointed that there's not a Canadian goose skin for Untitled Goose Game. I mean, maybe there is, but what about my goose boys? So a man needs help, you help him isn't in every episode, but it is the decider for several, and it speaks mostly to the spirit of community that is in rural towns, and that can be within rural towns, where you help one another, you raise barns together, and there's a variety of problems that comes in the show. Like, without those problems, there wouldn't be a show. That's like what plot works. Here comes someone with a problem. It's the same kind of thing as the early 70s with all those wandering heroes like in Kung Fu and the A-Team and the Hulk and the $1 Million Man and the $1 Million Woman or Bionic Woman. Anyways, they'd wander around till someone needs help, then they solve a problem, and then they'd leave. And with little to no concern for being paid for it or reimbursed. Which, as the Joker says, you're good at something, never do it for free. Nah, you can do it for free, it's fine. It speaks to one of the core principles, I think, in all humanity is our community, and that we help one another when we need it without necessarily needing personal gain, or without asking for personal gain ahead of time. Gooses can't give you anything, except for love.
The geese. Gooses!
But they still need to be helped if somebody's oiling their eggs. Several people consider geese and the Canadian goose to be a pest species, which I think there are some pest people. And we can see that we do this all the time. If you go to a teller and you're a few cents short, more often than not, they'll shrug it away because it's a few cents, and pennies don't matter. And they care more about you than they should about the company. And that's what strikes me as most revolutionary, is it's very people-focused. Just about everyone in the business is technically a businessman, but they're farmers. They raise their own food. They grow crops. They sell them at their stand. There hasn't been an episode in a farmer's market yet, There's also this thing where going into town is a big deal, and I super relate to that. Like, you need to set aside an hour of your day if you're gonna go into town and need a couple of excuses. And if someone can run into town for you for something, then that's super helpful. And it gets to the point where it's a chore where you don't want to drive 10 minutes to town and then drive back for one or two things. You want a couple things, so it can be a trip, so you don't have to do it all the time. I hard relate to that one.
Put on the counters just for you, kitty cat.
Oh, no, I wanted the sour jelly beans.
Okay, but I just drove all the way to town and back, so...
But that's something you hear in Iowa. It's something you hear in small towns. A couple farmers sitting around a table talking about how it hasn't rained enough, how it rains too much. They never seem to be happy with the amount of rain that happens. My grandpa always said, never trust a man over 35 that doesn't wear a hat. Grandpa's different from Papa. Those are two different men for me. It's also of note that the show is kind of progressive in how it relates to racialized people, or marginalized people in the show, in that everyone just kind of does their job. Their race isn't strictly a factor on who they talk to, and there's kind of different lines. People in the country are more so prejudiced against people in the city because they come in and they're rude and stuff. Of course, people of color do live everywhere, and even in small rural towns, racism still exists, but also there's a chance that it doesn't exist, because everywhere there's people just doing stuff. So it's good that the show isn't just white, but there's still a lot more racial tension in small towns. It isn't exactly noticeable. What? Why are you looking at the ground? Do you want down now? There's still racism, and there's still a lot of conservatives in rural areas, but it gets to the point where everyone is individualized, as in, this is the person you see at the grocery store all the time, they just happen to be black. Practically, there isn't a lot of racism within the community that way. But racism still exists, in the general small forms, when there's a group of people, when people visit from the city, thinking that the city is full of minorities that are wrong and troubled. There's a tension between country life and city life that even still comes in the show. Racism slowly hit itself before 2016 in vague conservative policies like busing, different kinds of voting laws for protection, different kind of criminal laws, and only recently has been really super unvagued by events with the quiet part loud. But Letterkenny looks at a better part of humanity, a better part of the country, and that being the community that forms around people. You know your neighbor, you talk to them, you know what they grow, and if a man needs help, you help him. But the other positive part, I think, of the city that really captures is you have time to help one another. There's poor people and underworked people everywhere. But if you're a farmer and you depend on what you grow, you do your chores and you're kind of done for the day. Of course, there's always more to do, other projects around, but you do have time to cut out if someone around you has a problem, which I think is the most important thing to get out of the show, is that they are able to help each other more because they have free time, because they're able to spend time helping one another. The real distinction between country and city folk is the presence of companies in people's lives. In a city, just about everyone has to depend on a company for a job, a company that works them an arbitrary number of hours a week for a lower pay than they deserve. I have other videos on this if you want to pick at those points. You have to get your groceries from a store that's a company that was most likely made by a factory farm, and you really have to go out of your way in order to get groceries from a local farmer. Ooh, you are much less well-behaved than the goose. Okay. Being busy, always having work to do, always having a project, always having an event to go to, also actively separates us from our community and the people that we could be helping and that need help. For some people, it isn't possible, if they find a man needs help, to help him. Because they need help, because they're busy, because they're tired, because they're spent, because they don't know how, or because they don't know them. So sitting around and shooting the breeze with your friends is the most important part. Oh, one of the most important parts of this. One of the bright parts of the show are the characters that they slowly help one by one. But then in the big season finales or the bigger episodes, other characters are called on for help that were helped before. And seeing a big crossover of these personalities and characters that you've been seeing is very exciting in the show. A person that we've only seen fight one another comes in to help them, well, fight some more. It's very telling that in the show, the most violent threat that happens is when they go into the city and they're confronted with a profit motive for someone else. There's also one of the most frequent depictions of indigenous people, Native Americans, in any show since like Walker, Texas Ranger. And I'm real shaky on Walker, Texas Ranger. I was real young when I watched that. So Letterkenny is great and funny and interesting, but it's also a look of, wouldn't it be a better world if we all had a little bit more free time, if we're all a little bored, if we had the kind of energy and money where we could sit around a little more and make time for one another and our neighbors. And it's also like geese! Man needs help, you help him. And you can help me by liking this video, leaving a comment down below, maybe talking with one another, get to know our little community here. I don't have a community yet, but you know, it'd be nice. Maybe check out my Patreon where I write some fiction and support me so I can make more fun videos like this. Tell me your favorite joke in Letterkenny that's then memed to impossibility. But I appreciate it if you do any or all of those things. Giving me money on Patreon is not necessary, and I can still probably let you read a couple things, and you can follow the Patreon to hear when I'm published in whatever places, and to keep up with all my news about me.
I've noticed walking down the path of my life, usually in the deepest and darkest and saddest times, that there's always one set of footprints in the sand, and they're webbed.
Also, a funny aside, one time in 2nd grade I was told to ask what my ancestry was, and I went through my father and I got Italian, and then I went to my mother and she said, I don't know, ask your papa. I'm like, okay, I'll ask my papa. When I asked papa, he said we're hillbillies. I'm like, no, where did we come from, like in Europe, because we're like white people. And my mama was like, well, I'm an 8th Indian. I'm like, oh, okay. My papa says we're hillbillies. So then when we came to turn the assignment, I told the teacher that I was, what is it, like 40-some% hillbilly? And she said no. And she said that's wrong. I'm like, it's what my papa said. And she's like, your name's Richard, you're English. I'm like, what? No one gave me that answer. I don't know why. I don't know why. Alright, thanks for giving me some of your free time to watch this. Pitter pat.